what many consider the first major Kurosawa classic, 1948's Drunken Angel. This film was very much elevated by rich cinematography from Takeo Ito, the two stirring lead performances from Mifune and Shimura, plus extremely rich dialogue, a bouncing script which does not wallow in merely stating truisms about post-war Japan or employing as dialogue true-life, trivial, conversational charade, a characteristic which defines Ozu's Orientalist Western adulation. Kurosawa would be considered by some loonies presumably, too Western to be a truly Japanese filmmaker, at least according to some cranks over in Japan itself, whilst I can see how in comparison to the aforementioned Ozu or Kinoshita or Kobayashi, or certainly Kinugasa, how Kurosawa feels more a Western focused filmmaker than those others. I don't feel as though the quality is Western so much as charismatic and lively, energetic, well performed, and of exploring territory other than somber depression and post-war cynicism. Oh, what have you done, Kurosawa? How dare you do more for Japan than reduce it to a series of identifiable aesthetic cliches? We actually love traditionalism when it's convenient for us, when we decide it's a banal bulwark against American cultural imperialism, which is fine, fight against it, I can sympathize too entirely. And not a political impetus for an eventual hyper-nationalist fascism. You didn't need America's help to get to that place, did you now? The point is, negatively comparing Kurosawa to the likes of Ozu, even Mizoguchi, or Kinoshita, or whomever, is so vapid and reductionist. To me, this is like criticizing Orson Welles for being too European compared to America's champion, John Ford. That comparison isn't perfect. Kinugasa occupies the place of John Ford in Japan more so than Ozu, really, although Ozu was working long before Kurosawa, as Ford had, and often finds himself celebrated by a vaguely Orientalist American sentimental condescension. I have nothing against Ozu's films. I think it's nice that Tokyo Story, an experimental film where every scene occurs twice in the runtime, is as adored as it is, but the reception is the byproduct of Orientalist claptrap, let's be totally real. It would never faze me if the Japanese placed Ozu at the top of their auteur list, but the idea that Americans or the Western world can appreciate the films beyond their cinematographic qualities or a general humanism, which inevitably spills out of Ozu's work, is fairly hollow, and trying to borrow the Japanese adulation of Ozu over Kurosawa to account for the Western world's apparent overemphasis on Kurosawa, which may have been the case to an extent, is transparently this, and not a reasonable assessment of both filmmakers' positive attributes and definable components. Drunken Angel is not one of Kurosawa's very best. I used to think of Stray Dog as being far more indicative of his later genius than this title, though Drunken Angel is still very impressive and quite watchable, a stellar instance of Kurosawa's film direction 101, involving Renoir beyond his repressive theatrical confines, moving the camera about, conscious of an edit's metamorphosing effect, and understanding that visuals move a script rather than a script conjuring her visuals. Drunken Angel is a far better film about alcoholism than anything in Hollywood up to that point, far less sentimental and much realer than the trite, though not meritless, Lost Weekend, Wilder's 1945 Best Picture Oscar winner. Also well known as the earliest perhaps post-war Yakuza film from Japan, Drunken Angel does not resemble the Yakuza flicks as we know them, Suzuki, Fukasaku, Gosha, or his later Miike Nightmares. It is a more considerate, emotive drama, one of the two leads being a younger Yakuza, although it remains one of the more acclaimed titles within this proposed genre bracket of Japanese film. Drunken Angel is very instructive as to how to direct an engaging drama. Renoir is useful too, although his loyalty to the theatre is stifling possibly, although Kurosawa directing a tale adapted prior by Renoir, in this case 57's Lower Depths, is potentially also useful. Check out a discussion of both Renoir and Kurosawa's film uploaded to this channel a few years back, but maybe not as useful as a director who found a way to set his story amongst several settings within a city. It doesn't feel stagnant, it doesn't feel like a series of sets, it feels lived in, organic, and free-flowing. The noted author C.L.R. James once claimed that, whilst many cricketers were not entirely wrong when accusing legendary Australian batsman Don Bradman of employing a tasteless, ungentlemanly style of cricketing, they would also inherently imply that they could bat as statistically impressively as Batman, they just chose not to, out of a sense of supposed class. Whilst James himself believed that Bradman's aggressive playing would disintegrate a game he once loved more so, he scoffed at the idea that any of those other batsmen, critiquing Bradman, or any other cricketing batsman in the world, could match Bradman's world-shifting scores. And this is how I feel about the other Japanese film enthusiasts' disdain, prospectively, for Kurosawa, Was he appealing to the Western world more so, and less to a formal Japanese traditionalism in his films? Yes, maybe he was, better or worse, but could Ozu Kobayashi, Kinoshita, or Kinugasa create films as evocative, all-encompassing, universal, and consistently thoroughly entertaining without having to employ identifiable depressive attitudes, a gothic mortal seriousness, a vivid, somewhat gimmicky technicolor, or a convicted retreat into traditional formalism via cinematic assertiveness? 1953's Gate of Hell from Mr. Kinugasa? No, they could not. They certainly did not. To quote Damien Hirst, the artist behind The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, that shark in the glass, in regard to those other Japanese auteurs who say they could have done what Kurosawa did, but out of some sense of good taste, they just chose not to. Yes, to quote Mr. Hirst, "But you didn't, did you?" No, they didn't. And so Drunken Angel remains a singular, visceral, and very watchable work in the annals of post-war Japanese film, and a very commendable title from the overwhelmingly able Kurosawa. Marvellous.